Hello, hello, hello. Greetings. Welcome, everyone. Good evening. We are now live and we're going to go ahead and get this thing started. I'm glad to be able to address you guys one more day because that's what we're dealing with right now. That extra day is called a leap day. It shows up on a leap year, right? So we have a 29th of February. Black History Month lasts us one day extra this year, so you get one extra message from me. Now I know I haven't had it every week this month. I skipped one week because I was quite busy, and life is life. But every week I've been coming through this month with some good content, good information that you guys. I appreciate you guys watching and appreciate the message that I had to deliver. Uh, yeah, uh, but I've been giving it, and I'm making sure that I address the racial issue. But it's not just about race, right? The things I've been talking about are general principles, right? I talked about in our first meeting at the very beginning of the month, on the first of the month, we talked about the whole history of how do we get to this position racially, right? And I also wrapped in other aspects outside of race to also include, other demographics, gender, and so on and so forth. Uh, then after that, we went on to go ahead and discuss. Well, that next week I actually took off, but the week after that we talked about love. MLK's lost message because we always quote this one quote, but we missed the spirit of love that he talked about. And he talked about love so much more than he talked about the dream, and how we treat people by the content of the color, not the color of their skin. Right? That was one quote in time, but he talked about love all the time. And so how that got missed to distort his message. So that was a good message. Then last week we talked about fetishing innocence, right? How we focus so much on our innocence as an ultimate goal, and why we do that, and how we use that innocence as a way to feel self-righteous enough to be able to sit in judgment of our enemies, not just to judge them, but also to bring condemnation, to bring some type of to destroy our enemies a lot of times. So it turns us against each other in a lot of ways. So just that's just to give you guys a summary of what we talked about so far this month. But today we are going to be talking about good faith, being in good faith. All right. How um we all would like to think that we operate in good faith, that we treat people well, and that's the energy that we operate in. But if we're honest, we really don't do it consistently across the board, right? And I'm not just saying that, we have to be perfect human beings, but there are some of us, well, not just some of us, all of us, even if we're not doing it today or at this moment, but there are times in our lives where we may consistently operate in good faith towards certain people or groups of people, ones that we love and trust, the people that are in close proximity to our lives that we feel like we can trust and operate with that way. But then there's other folks that we might not be too fond of, that we hate, that are not so close in proximity to us, that we don't quite give the benefit of the doubt the same way as others, and we don't operate in that same good faith. So when we get into disagreements and arguments, maybe somebody that I'm fond of, I might approach the argument a certain way, or if they make a mistake in their argument, I might give them a bit of a bit of doubt that they misspoke or something like that, right? And it works a little bit more agreeingly and more peacefully. But somebody that I don't like their position, or maybe I think they're coming at it from a different energy. Maybe I don't have any evidence. They didn't say it specifically, but I just feel inside my spirit that they just have a negative view of people like me, or people that and stuff like that. And so we don't operate with the same good faith. We assume bad intentions on certain people and not others, so that we don't receive their message the same way. We come back defensive in certain ways, right? So here I want to focus on how do we operate in good faith. I'll start with our politics, right? Because I've always, throughout this whole month, I've been wrapping in our politics to make sure we understand and can see these things in our government. How our politics are a reflection of not of us. They are our leaders. They are our representatives. So we vote them in office. We like to think that everything's wrong because of them, because they're a good scapegoat. And say, yeah, those politicians in Washington, it's an easy scapegoat, but they're truly reflections of us. If you go back and look at all the videos and stuff I talked about this month, I talked about it in politics. I talked about it in everyday life between individuals like you and me. And it's showing up in both spheres because we're going to vote people to represent us that reflect our own impulses and the way that we act with each other. So a lot of times it's good and easy to say, nah, those politicians are, they serving themselves and not each other, us and all this other stuff. Or maybe our politics is broken, maybe the vote don't count and we shouldn't care about voting and all this other stuff because we're trying to scapegoat the whole problem on somebody else and put it out of our hands so we don't have to do anything. So we can rest back and just let things go on autopilot and not have to take responsibility for it. And we don't have to clean up our own closets. But we have to really look in the mirror and say, well, hold on, we have something to do here with this. Maybe we're not as powerless as we think we are, like we like to think we are. It's much more convenient to think it's a big giant conspiracy of strong people who hide behind closed doors that are just so good that they never leave a sign of evidence. We just call them they with quotes without defining who they are. And that's just what we've succumbed to in our society. So I'm trying to help people take their own personal initiative. That's not a popular stance, to take responsibility for their own lives and make things and make a change. That's not a popular stance. No politician is going to say, hey, the American people, you're the problem why we are in this situation right here, because folks are going to get self-defensive. They're not going to like you. They're not going to vote for you for that. Instead, they're going to say the American people are good. The American people are wonderful. They got about all this other stuff. They're going to blow smoke up our rear ends, right? And tell us what we want to hear, and just blame it on, hey, I'm trying to be on your side. It's them that we need to go after, and they'll tell you exactly who it is that you need to be aware of and distrustful of, and all this other stuff. So we need a reset because nobody's out there really telling us that we need to reset, and I'm the one that has to do it if nobody else is. We need to press a repause, reset, and let's operate in good faith. All right, kind of a golden rule, so to speak. Treat each other like you would want to be treated, right? Fair enough. We can do that. So before I get too deep into the concept, let's talk about how our politics often lack good faith. Because when the Democrats are talking about the Republicans talking about the Democrat, they're not giving any good faith, right? If somebody stumbles up on a word or something, aha, they're senile and they're incompetent. We're ready to jump on them, right? Somebody on our side, because we're actually doing that right now with Trump and Biden, right? They are both pretty old and going through some stuff, right? But both of them have done tons of stumbling on their words, speaking, slurring, and all this other crazy stuff that you can easily make the argument both ways. But a lot of times, most people are only looking at it one way. They're putting most of the focus one way. Sometimes the media focuses more on one side more so than the other because whatever sells, they're in the profit industry at the end of the day. If you understand what their profit incentive and motives are, you understand a good portion of what the media is doing. A lot of other motives that people put on there depends on what outlets. Of course, some of them are kind of obviously biased left and right, but a lot of the mainstream in the middle are really just following money. They screw anybody over for money at the end of the day, including themselves sometimes. So that's what happened to Fox. They screwed themselves over when they got sued for 700 something $1 million and had to pay that money to because they lied about the Trump election, the voting machines. Basically, they had to pay that. So, but at the time, it was popular to do a certain message because they didn't want to piss off the voters. They didn't want to piss off the Trump base and all this stuff. The momentum was heading in one way. They followed that momentum, and then they had to pay the cost afterwards. All right, but anyways, back to our politics. We're polarized, right? But we weren't always the way as polarized as we were. The Democrat and Republican Party, if you go back, not even a full century, you don't even have to go a full century back. And we used to didn't be, this is the liberal party, this is the conservative party. That used to be something that did not really exist. You had liberals and conservative all mixed up in both parties. All right. And that's what how our political situation were. And there were people that had said, hey, I feel like we should be more polarized to help people make a decision and stuff like that, and there were other people that said that might make us too divisive. I'll push back. And there were a lot of debates about that. But traditionally, anybody who knows the history of this country would be able to tell you that we weren't as divided, conservative versus liberals or whatever, throughout our history. That became more acute over time as things went on. And actually, there's a good book called "Why We're Polarized" by Ezra Klein that actually goes through and explains that story and that narrative, how we got to that point. And I think he does a pretty good job. Now, Ezra, he's somebody that's definitely on the left wing of the spectrum, but on the political spectrum, but he definitely does a very good job of being even handed in this analysis. So I think that's actually in that book, I would say per se. So there's other stages of life where he may not be as even handed, but he did a good job of disciplining himself in that book. So I think that's a good read for anybody of any party. Um, so yeah, so our politics didn't used to be that divided up. Over the years, they became more divided because if you listen to the politicians and how historians, people how they talk about it, Republicans and Democrats, they used to go out to dinner and be friends together, hang out, go, work out together, even be roommates with each other, um, and stuff. They were really friends. They went to work. They were friendly, cordial. It wasn't all this gameplay that you see going on these days. That's something that over time worked its way in there, and I'd say probably it worked its way in the most during that Newt Gingrich revolution. As he ended 40 some odd years of well, let's start back. The Democrats ran the House of Representatives for about 40 some odd years straight. And Newt Gingrich, he was a Republican. He's like, you know what? I want us to run the House of Representatives. How can we get us to run the House of Representatives? And what he ended up doing was he basically started making things more divisive, and his rhetoric was demonizing and stuff, and trying to point fingers at folks, moralizing things, trying to take where the family values, if you remember my innocence message, it was down up in there. Basically, we're the good guys, they're the bad guys type of thing. So it made it more antagonistic, and it got to the point where our politics started losing good faith in one another. You have good faith if you're friends with each other, right? You're cordial. The people you debate with is like, hey, we might disagree a little bit, but we can be friends at the end of the night. But at some point, when it becomes antagonistic like that, it's not going to be that way anymore. Then all of a sudden, people start losing good faith in one another. And so that Gingrich revolution kind of did that, but it was successful politically, right? Because they were when Newt Gingrich took the House of Representative during the Bill Clinton's tenure back in the 90s, they ended about 40 some odd years of Democrats holding the House of Representatives. And so it was successful, during that time frame when Newt was doing his thing. C-SPAN started coming out, just like, what, they gonna put video cameras paid for by the government to just watch the House of Representatives? Folks started doing political stunts right there on the floor that never were happening before, right? So people took advantage of that in order to score points. Again, the politics start lacking good faith because even folks in the Gingrich's own party at that time did not like what he was doing, and so he needed to stop those silly games. He was on the outskirts. I think every generation there's new people that play that role. Like today, you think about and a lot of it's you would think about, you got your Marjorie Taylor Greens and some of the Jordan, Jim Jordan, and you got the Gates and some familiar faces, Tea Partiers, and um, that are more contentious and rebellious and are always going to point some fingers and accuse somebody, and they're always going to be on a witch hunt for some type of scandal to blame the other side and all that other stuff. We have the next generation of that coming in. And I mean, previous generations of them become too soft and they get replaced by new generations of them over the years. One thing that you will recognize about me, if you watch enough of my live videos, is that I look at things on a long time span. I'm not, when I told you guys, this is Black History Month and history is one of the words in it. But if you watch my videos, you probably didn't get the biggest history lesson of your life. I didn't go through and tell you each event, and then this year this happened, this year that, I just gave you the key things, and I gave you a general transition of what happens over time, because a lot of times we miss the forest for the trees. We're so stuck in the moment, and we miss what's happening in the long term, right? We think we've won these little itty bitty old battles, but we're losing the war, because in the long run we undermine ourselves, and that's what's happening. You have new generation of folks that are what they call we're the outsiders, right? we're not from government. We're not part of politics, right? We're from, whatever sector they're from, business or whatever. So it's always some new outsiders that are trying to throw out the old school establishment. Hey, get rid of them, put me in instead. They're just being contentious and operating not necessarily in good faith, just to change, get power basically. And it's an effective tool because it works. How many of us always, tend to have some leaning towards those outsiders, are mad at the establishment, the people that's been in Washington? The longer you've been there, the more I'm mad at you, type of thing, right? Because uh, sometimes we need to operate in good faith too. Sometimes we don't even give good faith to our politicians. They're human beings just like you and I are. See, when we talked about the Martin Luther King love story, we have to love everybody, even the politicians that you might hate, even the media that you might hate. We think we're easy to, if somebody say, hey, those media, they're conspiring, they're all together and in on it and trying to make some bit. Would you like it if somebody said that about you, that you were in some back room conspiring and in it? No, you wouldn't like somebody to talk about you, right? So operate in good faith. Treat somebody else the same way that you would want to be treated yourself about these things. It's really very simple, but I think we lost track about it because our culture has made it okay for certain entities, such as politicians or media, or the other party that you don't like, to be made fun of, ridiculed, and have conspiracies thrown upon them. And, just because I wouldn't put it past them because I don't like them, right? Those aren't the people that I have close proximity to. Just because of that, we don't extend the same good faith that we want towards us, that we would do towards our friends. If you say the same thing about my friends, like, wait, you can't say that about Jim, you can't say that about Jessica. I know them. Something's wrong. That's not right. Let me go talk to them, see what's going on. Hey, you can't be talking about my such and such, because you give them the benefit of the doubt, right? You're operating with good faith towards your friend and all this other stuff. So you actually need proof. You need something more solid before you're gonna, go down that road. Well, what about the other side of the political spectrum? Some of us have never found a conspiracy they didn't like. If it's against the other party, it's like, yeah, they're corrupt over there. I wouldn't put it past them. Yep, they stole the election. I don't even need to see a stolen ballot. Or if I just see one random thing that might be wrong in the election, I'm ready to blow the whole thing. I'm ready to get rid of everything, right? We're about to lose our whole democracy because I'm gonna lose faith in the whole election because one vote might be off. I need perfection on this thing. Otherwise, I'm gonna use that as an excuse to just throw our whole republic away. One vote, right? Because we want to go to the extreme and say, hey, if one vote can't be trusted, then all of them can't, right? Instead of saying that, well, that one vote that I'm able to prove was actually wrong because we are actually prosecuting them and they're going to jail, for example. That's actually showing the system might work, right? You could take it that way. Our system is working by that evidence, as opposed to, all right, we might have caught this, but there's probably 10,000 other things we didn't see. So therefore, I just don't want to trust it because maybe it's in my political favor, and so therefore and I'm gonna put the blame all on one party for being responsible for messing the whole thing up, and we're just gonna flip the whole table over and destroy the monopoly game and go home. Are we really operating in good faith? At the end of the day, when we do these types of things, when we look at our political neighbors across on the other side of the field. So those are things that you have to wrestle with yourself. And if you haven't wrestled with these things, maybe you're a newbie on these type of concepts, then this is the day that we try to turn a new leaf, turn a new corner. How do you operate in good faith with other folks? You might not like what other folks are doing, but that doesn't give you the right to just insert whatever narrative or intentions behind it that you don't know nothing about, right? So we all get in debates with people. Some of us debate online, right? We have some arguments with our significant others. Um, a lot of times when we're in these arguments, how often is it that you actually change people's minds, right? If you're talking about politics, you can argue left, right, T's blue, but most of the time you're not changing anybody's mind, right? And they're not changing yours too. You have to look at it the other way around, right? You might think about it as like, man, everybody's all stuck in their opinion, but wait a minute, did you change your mind? No, I didn't change mine either, did I? Interesting. We have to look at ourselves in the mirror. It's not just about them. If you're a church going person, you might hear sometimes the priest or preacher or somebody might say, well, I'm not talking about you, I'm talking about your neighbor, the person next to you. They say that kind of jokingly, but it's not really that much of a joke because what they realize is that people don't people are easy to deflect and see the plank in every and they'll see the speck in somebody else's eye and miss the plank in their own eye, right? That's a biblical represent from scripture. So and that's what we're saying. We have to we're not operating in good faith. That's what that basically means. If I'm operating in good faith, then I'm gonna treat everybody else the same way I'm treat myself. So if I got a plank in my eye and I can't see it, then I should be blind to your speck or your plank too. Then, or maybe I could become just as good at seeing the planks in my eye or even the specks in my own eye, right? As I see the specks in others, because some things become glaringly clear in everybody else, but it just hits different from ourselves. And why is that? Because we have a first person perspective. We're locked inside our own heads, right? We know our own motives, we know our own intentions, we know our own storyline lines. And because we know all these things, because we feel like we have good intentions in everything that we don't judge anything we do as being wrong. Uh, and actually, I remember I used to watch Dr. Phil back in the day. Uh, uh, and he used to have his guests come on the show, right? And there'd be some conflict or some troubled person that's dealing with some issues, but usually they would never acknowledge that they had a problem at all. But what Dr. Phil would do is he'd have cameras that'd be sent home with the people, and they would actually be mounted up in their houses in various different rooms so they can record the dynamics of what's happening at home so they can have it on tape and bring it back to the show. And what would happen is when it gets to the show, they would actually, edit the tape and run the clips. Of course, they don't want to run hours and hours of clip where nothing's going on, ain't nobody even in the house, but they'd edit it down to the meaningful parts or whatever. And so finally, they would argue all day, back and forth, left and right, till they blew. The person would not own up to their part of the garbage whatsoever. So finally, they would run the clip from what happened inside the house that he got recorded of their behavior. And as the person sit there and watch themselves on that tape, this is the first time seeing themselves from like a third person perspective as opposed to the first person perspective. They'd be shocked. They'd be like, "Oh my gosh," and they'd be crying and all this other stuff. It would suddenly hit them. I was like, "I'm not," and then they say stuff like, "I'm not a bad person. That's not me. I mean, I don't act that way." Because there's some disconnect that happens inside our head that when we're in the moment, we're in the present, we're live, we think that we're perfect. We fetish that innocence about ourselves. But it's not until we're forced out of that and have to look at it from a third person perspective, and it's like, well, you see what exactly happened right here. Yeah, that looks pretty bad. You were yelling because sometimes like, I didn't yell, I was just talking to you normal. Like, look at the tape. Oh dang, I was like yelling, wouldn't I? Man, that's messed up. It's eye opening. It's eye opening. But the reason why we're able to be so judgmental of media figures, politicians, and look down upon them, and have such a big lack of faith towards them, is because they are on tape. We get to see them every day in as from third person perspectives, right? And so therefore we're ready and quick to judge them because we can see it all out there, even when they're hypocrites and they contradict themselves. We see it exactly for what it is, and so therefore we feel righteous to be able to judge them. I don't behave that way because can't nobody say this about me. Well, maybe that's the reason they can't say it about you, because you're not having somebody following you around with a camera 24/7. You're not having hundreds of thousands of words recorded about you almost every day, right? So it makes a big difference, because if some of us had cameras recording every word that we said and it was documented, man, it might start looking bad. And actually, we as regular citizens are starting to slightly get a taste of that, because as regular citizen, if you're what do they call it? No, Jane Doe and what's the other one? I don't John Doe. Man, I don't know. I'm getting old. All right. So you have John Doe, Jane Doe, right? If we're regular old John Does and Jane Does of the world, um, nobody really cares about, our history over decades of what we said over the years, so we can pull those clips back up and throw them in our face like we do our politicians who run for president, right? But let's say if Jane Doe or John Doe suddenly makes it big, becomes famous, right? Gets a platform where people are actually following them, listen to them. Maybe they have a good platform where they're saying positive stuff. Somebody out there is going to have a problem with what they say. No, you can't. There's always somebody that has a problem with you say, no matter how good you are, right? Even Martin Luther King, as I said, had his haters. So somebody's gonna have a problem with it. Guess what they're gonna do? They're gonna go to your social media page. Let's see what you posted 10 years ago, right? And they're gonna throw that stuff back. And all of a sudden, stuff that you said that you thought you walked perfectly fine, all of a sudden they hold it against you. So that's a small taste of it. Because again, we don't have the cameras following us every day throughout our whole lives like the politicians do. So we don't recognize how much we contradict ourselves all the time. And I try to bring it up to pointed out to us to help us to be more recognized when these things are happening. I remember I had a post that I made about on Facebook. I can't remember what conflict it was, but it was one. It was a we were getting it. We was ramping ourselves up to start another conflict with some country, probably in Middle East or something. And my position was like, usually what happens is you get folks in the media saying that hey, this person is a terrible person, they're responsible for the deaths of blah blah blah, and they did this horrible act and this horrible act, and so on and so forth. They say every argument possible to make the person look like a monster and to justify the move towards the war, right? And uh and so that's what you hear in 1 second. And most of the time, if somebody were to say, no, 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 we don't need to go against the war with them, then the argument back against that is like, you're okay with letting a monster like that stay in office, right? That those type of things make politicians look bad. So a lot of times politicians just say it's more safe to just go lockstep and go to war instead of, starting to look bad by saying, no, I don't want to go to war or something like that. But honestly, you can make that same argument about 100 different leaders or people across the world in different countries all over the map, right? That there's horrible people everywhere, right? That's responsible for horrible things all over the place. We don't start wars with every single last one of them, right? And that's why I try to get people to think like, well, there has to be some type of method to the madness, not just, hmm. I decided that it's probably advantageous for whatever reasons I want to go to war to do it. Now all I have to do is just convince everybody that they have bad people of this, that, or the other, and there may be good, legitimately are good arguments to say that they're a bad person or whatever. But again, it doesn't justify the war, though. That's the thing. And again, if we do that to every person that's a bad person that we think in the world, we call ourselves the judge, jury, and executioner of all that. We're going to be in war with the whole world, the whole planet, because there's bad people all over the place. So we can make anybody look bad. Bottom line is you can make anybody look bad if you really want to. If that's your objective and your agenda, you can make anybody into a monster. Well, that's one thing you can recognize, that those type of arguments happen. And next thing you know, we end up going into war. Now, once we actually get into the war and the media started off with like, hey, this person's a monster, a bad guy, and all this stuff, they should be removed from office. It would help the people out. They'd be free. And everybody would be like, it'd be great without that wonderful person, that not wonderful, but a terrible person in office, right? That's what they say. As soon as we start the war and it's dragging on and costing billions and billions of dollars and all this other stuff, it's kind of like, hey, we've been in there for all this long, we still haven't won, and there's no victory there. It's like, and when are we gonna get out of there? You know what I'm saying? Whose bad idea was it to get us into this war in the first place, right? You'll have the same media talking both sides of it, but the bottom line, they're gonna tell you whatever message is good and profitable. That's really what it is. What's the easy message to go along with to make them look bad? Because once people look bad at the media, then they stop watching it. It's not good for business. So they do whatever message makes money for them. But at the same time, the same folks that were influenced to be like, yeah, that's a terrible person, we need to do something about that. Yeah, I don't know, somebody must be wrong with them if they're against doing something like that. As soon as it's dragging on and it's costing lives and resources, and you got family that's overseas and they're in harm's way, and you're not sure exactly why we over there after a year later and stuff like that, all of a sudden we're like, man, this is not a waste of time. When are we going to get out of there? We need to close, we flip to the whole other side. But since we don't track our own history, we haven't watched it on tape. Nobody's throwing it back on our face like they do with politicians to show that they are on both sides of the argument. We never realize that we are on both sides of the argument too, a lot of times, that we aren't consistent in everything we do. And actually, I recently saw a video from Jimmy Kimmel. He interviewed a couple Trump supporters on the street, basically, and he basically put out some scenarios and said that some negative scenarios and said that they applied to Joe Biden, but they really actually applied to Trump. All right, and so once he said that Joe Biden, slept with some porn star and pays $130,000 hush money, that type of thing, or whatever, and you may have seen it or not. I can post it in the comments later on. But that type of thing, and ask them what their opinion about it. They say, "Oh, it's horrible, it's bad. I would never vote for a person that did that. But Joe Biden, he's blah blah blah." And so then when the person says, "You know what? Oh yeah, I misspoke. That wasn't Joe Biden. That was Donald Trump." And then on a dime, that person would flip up and say, actually, I don't blame him. I got family members that cheated and I still respect them. And it was just like night and day. From one second you were arguing against, all of a sudden you realize somebody else did it. You flipped your argument. And that's just random people on the street. That's not, some famous not celebrity, but a politician. That's not just some media figure, but that's us. They are reflections of us. They're just like we are. We think that we're holy, but we just don't recognize it because nobody really shines that light upon ourselves to get ourselves right. We rather shine the light on everybody else to get everybody else right. But if nobody's shining their lights on themselves, then all of us end up broken, and we end up in a broken society. And so that's where we find ourselves. Everybody wants to dig their feet into the ground. Um, in debates, we don't want to give an edge to the other person. It's all about winning an argument, right? How do I win the argument? If I show up and debate somebody, I want to beat them. I want to make them look terrible or whatever. At what point does the truth matter, right? Or at what point does arguing in good faith, when does it stop being about the other person and more so about the message, right? The truth and fact of the situation. How come we only trust the information if it comes from certain people and not the information itself? Doesn't 2 plus 2 still equals 4 no matter who says it? But a lot of times, if it came from this source, even if it makes sense, it can be as logical as it wants to be. Nah, I'm not gonna mess with it. At some point, we gotta prioritize good faith, right? We gotta have good faith in our arguments and stuff. Now, I understand that there's sources out there, and don't get me wrong, there's sources that just make stuff up and lie and all that stuff. So I'm not saying that there's no importance to sources and stuff, but what I'm saying is that if uh, you should have good faith, right? You should argue in good faith is basically the point. So don't dig your feet into the ground. I think that everybody at some point learned that there are people out there that don't argue in good faith, right? It might have been out in the playground as a kid and you were arguing with somebody and somebody just, they just want to humiliate you and talk about your mama or whatever and have people be like, oh, and whatever, right? At some point you was like, well, everything they said was nothing they said was actually factual, right, or correct, but it got people excited and made other folks feel like they won and whatever, and so they walk away with it. And so we got to ask ourselves, what really is our intentions? We got to move with intention. If you don't move with intention, you're just gonna be strung along doing the same nonsense and craziness that everybody else is doing, and you're never gonna be in control of your life. You're never gonna be in control of your politics, your government, none of that stuff, right? The gravity. When I say things are like gravity, what I mean is that's the natural order of things and where things are moving. Things are moving. When you see stuff moving in a bad direction and you don't know how we can ever change it, our politics are getting worse. People don't even know what the truth is. The more you see people fighting against the truth or saying stuff is fake news, they don't give no alternatives for good news that actually is more reliable or trustworthy themselves. They've never even told you what a journalistic standard needs to be held that's better. They just say, hey, just listen to us instead, don't listen to them. Really, are we operating in good faith, or are we just like, hey, just take my pill instead of taking their pill? um we really need to make sure we got to course correct here, people. That's plain and simple. And whether you learned that lesson on the playground, whether you learned it in a relationship, as every time you argument you never could reach a resolution, they never could see eye to eye, you lost every single time. Whether you know figured it out at work, when everything ran into a brick wall, as you tried to make your case for anything. At some point, you realize that there are people that don't operate in good faith. You want people to extend it to you, but you also have to prioritize and spending it doing it to others. And that means those concepts that I talked about previously in my other live videos of love, that the fetishing of the innocence and those different things like that, they have to come into play because you have to do your part to be a part of the solution. Otherwise, you're going to continue the problem. Now, I'm not saying that if one or two people only change up their ways and do things the right way, that's necessarily going to change the way gravity is moving. That all of a sudden our politics is going to change course. That has to happen on a larger scale than that, right? But at the end of the day, it produces benefits for your life. It's good for you. You can in your space and how you operate in the circles that you move in, you'll see a positive difference in your life, and the impact that it has. So I would recommend it just for that sake alone. But whether or not you can set a spark that lights up a big huge fire that just goes on even bigger, there's a chance that could happen too. So I don't want you to lose faith in anything, but you really have to figure out what your priority is and move with a purpose, because it's not going to happen automatically. If you just work on autopilot day by day, your instincts are going to kick in, that you're born with, as opposed to you actually driving the wheel and being in control. That's what it comes down to at the end of the day. Who's driving the wheel? Who's driving the wheel? All right. So with that said, I did say it is Black History Month, so I will rap race into it a little bit, just to talk about it. But if you look at the historical story, if you do any research, and I challenge you to do that actually, if you don't trust any words I say, do the research yourself and look into history of what happened with Black people. Not the whole story and narrative. I've never been a fan of just rehashing the slavery story necessarily, just to make people angry and mad, or just to shame groups of people or anything like that. I want to, when I talk about things, I talk about things with a purpose. So I talk about, I'm not saying that I want to, I'm not necessarily saying we hide slavery and not talk about it either. I don't want to go to that extreme either. We do need to be truthful about our story, but we have to also be purposeful with how we talk about it too, as well. So when I talk about it, I'm moving with a purpose. My first video, when I say how we get here and I laid out our Americans' history in that story, I just briefly talked about this. I wasn't trying to get anybody all up in their fields, but I wanted to make sure you understood what the key pieces are as we went throughout history. How did technology have an influence on changing views on race, or how did, people's feelings and hearts about different things. And one thing I'm going to talk about right now is like, how did white Americans view Black Americans? In other words, did they have good faith towards their fellow Black Americans, and the stories that they told when Black people said that, hey, we're going through this, that, and the other? Did white Americans listen to them in good faith and say, you know what, let's listen to them and hear them out? Maybe there is some racism, some unfairness and stuff going on. We need to tend to it. And ultimately, it took things like technology, the video cameras, Emmett Till having an open casket with the photographies as those different things. When Rodney King, his got captured on video camera, right? Everybody didn't walk around with video cameras in their pocket like they do today. So a lot of stuff wasn't recorded, but it wasn't until stuff got forced into people's face with video footage that it was actually believed. But I don't think that anybody ever gave Black people the benefit of the doubt, or there was a lot of folks that lacked good faith in a lot of Black people throughout history, so that when they told their narratives, nobody believed it. It had to be forced to be believed. You had to see the footage of fire hoses and dogs being turned on peaceful marchers before people were moved to start doing something. And so if that's what it takes in order to make progress, are we operating in good faith? Because if we want to be honest about it, the only times that we're actually the only times Black people have really had their story affirmed is in the rearview mirror. It's in the hindsight 2020. Everybody, it's easy to acknowledge that, hey, those ancestors way back then, yeah, they were racist. I don't think anybody, there's many people that have problems doing that. That's easy to do. The problem that struggle is, well, what about modern day? What about what's going on today? Can we talk about this, and can we talk about it in a way where we have good faith, where if you say something and it doesn't sound pretty and it sounds disturbing, that I don't just shoot you down automatically or write you off and just say, "Oh, you're just some thug. You probably slagging your pants too much, causing bad tension. If you learn how to speak English right and all, I shouldn't have to prove to you that I am successful in this many areas of my life, that I have an honor roll and all this other stuff. I shouldn't have to go through all that just to be able to have a regular conversation that's treated in good faith, right?" And that's stuff that we see that happen all the time, where you'll see a news story and where they highlight, the fact that the kid was on an honor roll and all this other stuff. What they're doing is they're trying to fight come back the fact that there is no good faith there. That it's hard for folks to see people that are either black or other, are in certain demographics and groups as having as being innocent, or are having any validity to their statements or their positions or whatever. Because a lot of times it's easy to say, well, they probably deserved it. All right. So we have to operate in good faith because we want people to operate in good faith towards me. And I actually talked about in the last video, I said that there was a lot of commonality. And actually, it's funny that that happened, because something actually happened over the week, the last week since then, that actually in major politics. But what I said last week was, I said that there's commonality. That was that last week, or it might have been last week or the week before. But either way, there I said that there's commonality that a lot of folks that could happen. When I talked about the Trump and the FISA warnings, and the Russia investigation and all that stuff, the lack of trust. Or the lack of good faith in our institutions, right? That they can't give Trump a fair shot and everything. Well, that sounds familiar. There's Black Americans that lack good faith in in our criminal justice system, the institution, to be able to get the right treatment and stuff. And so I was like, okay, that could have been some common ground to make things happen. But did that ever happen? No. Why? Because the two groups don't have good faith in each other. so So there you go. I mean, and not just that example. I went through several different examples of similar things, because a lot of things, Trump is dealing with a lot of the criminal justice system in a lot of different ways, in ways that are similar to things that Black people have went through in the criminal justice system as well too. I'm not trying to say that one group has more validity. You have to rest on your own facts or whatever. That's still true or whatever. But what I'm saying is similar arguments could go both ways, and there could be similarity if folks cared about it in a broad sense, right? Because Black folks have been called having victim mentalities for decades, right? Maybe even centuries. But the same group of people that say the Black people have those victim mentalities, they're often not the same group of people that are saying that Trump has a victim mentality, as he blames everybody else for attacking him, or he's just fighting back. The only reason he is nasty is because everybody else is nasty to him, right? He does nothing to deserve that. He's just a good, innocent, pure person. Now, we know that Trump is rough around the edges, right? That's just to be light. So we know he does some behaviors, and he goes out there on the attack. He's not always just responding. He attacks folks, plain and simple, right? So he's just that type of person. But a lot of folks will buy into that victim mentality excuse for him, but they would never give the time of day to I mean, they don't say Trump has victim mentality, but when it comes to Black people, they're quick to say it, right? And they could easily, be fair and do the same thing both ways, but they don't. And at the end of the day, we don't extend the same good faith to all people the same way. All right. So I talked about that previously in a lot of different dynamics. And what ended up happening, Trump was speaking to a crowd of was it the conservative Blacks, some group basically, and he said some remarks that a lot of people said were racist, and you can look those up if you want to. Um, but anyways, but he ended up saying, he said something along the lines of, Black people like me because I'm being persecuted and treated in the jails too, all this other stuff. And so a lot of people took that wrong. It's like, man, only you come to talk to Black people, and all you can say is, hey, Black people like me because I'm a criminal like them or something, it just sounded weird or whatever. But it actually paralleled back to what I said earlier. So I'm not going to hold that against them too much, because what is what there could be some commonality there. He said himself he never thought about it that way. So he never extended the same good faith he gives to himself to the black people. He kind of openly admitted to that right there. And so but the question is, why wouldn't he? Why wouldn't he? If he wants that a certain type of faith towards him, why can't it go universally across the board? Because there could be some universal reforms to make things fair, to give everybody some good faith all the way across the board. But a lot of times, like I just want to get my favorite politician off the hook, so I'm just going to extend it to him. He has my good faith, but the other group doesn't, or I give good faith to other black folks. Let's go from that point, but I don't want to extend it to Trump. Now, again, like I said, I don't want to pretend as if there are no facts to consider in individual situations and stuff like that, because for one thing, we're talking about a group of people, and some might have more validity to their case than others, right, versus a single person. So that's not a fair left comparison. However, we at, I think most people get my point that we just simply lack good faith in each other, in our institutions, right? Every time Trump came into trouble throughout from 2016 on forward, main thing he did was, let's say, first he gets into office, right? We find out that, hey, Russia's influenced the election. So CIA, the FBI, whatever, the Department of Justice and CIA, I believe, they released some memo. That was in October of 2016, before the election, saying that that Russia was hacking and trying to release information to influence the election or whatever. So the government basically said what their findings were, and then for whatever reasons, Trump didn't want to believe it, and he said, "Oh, it's probably not Russia's some making up stuff, some overweight Chinese guy or something like that." Is what he said. Maybe not those exact words, but he was blaming everybody else but Russia and all this other stuff. And we went through this whole Mueller investigation just to come back to the same point, to finally get everybody to agree with what was originally said, that it wasn't just some made up stuff. But what he ended up doing was he threw our institutions under the bus. He said that the CIA is corrupt, the FBI is corrupt. They tried to go after Martin Luther King some years ago, so therefore you can't trust them with me now, right? It was kind of like cherry pickings. Like, the FBI was our friends, and we believe everything they say, until all of a sudden they came against the guy we didn't like. So all of a sudden now we're going to go against the time that they messed up some decades ago or whatever, and hold that against them. And that's effective. Some people will hold what you did wrong 5 million years ago against you for the rest of your life, and say that you can't be trustworthy for that. The black communities, they can do it too. They say Tuskegee and all this other stuff. Well, I don't, if that could happen, I lack good faith in our institutions to be able to do anything right. But I'll still send my kid to school and get a free lunch, eat the school lunch. I don't think they're trying to poison that. I didn't just, it's just like we cherry pick our conspiracies without need for evidence, context, or anything, right? And we're not really acting in good faith if we just sporadically do it. I don't think we need to be naive about anything, right? I'm not saying that there is nothing that doesn't happen that's suspicious or anything about these about various institutions or anything like that, right? Nobody's perfect, and there are certain things that are going on, but again, it should be rooted in something. All right. uh it should have some type of anchor, some type of factual basis to it. It can't be just like, well, I don't like these folks, so therefore I'm gonna believe any conspiracy that I can make up against the people that I don't like. So that's the nature that we're trying to get at here. So anyways, but black people, like I said, they've never had a period where modern day issues were being overwhelmingly admitted to in terms of the injustices that they faced. And so generally it's usually hindsight 2020. Those past generations of folks were bad. We're the good ones now. And so therefore, we're not going to own up to anything. And maybe 20, 30, 40 years later, some folks might own up to the stuff that happened back then. But at that point, it's too late to even care or get the right justice, or do really anything about it anyways, right? And so we end up in this hamster wheel, where we're stuck in it and we don't know how to get out, because we're not operating in good faith to give people the good faith that we want extended to ourselves. You cannot get something for yourself if you're not giving it to other people, or if you're selectively giving it out only to the identity groups or the people closest to you that you like and love. You got to give that to everybody. All right. So that's pretty much my message right there. I'm not going to hold you guys for much longer. It's probably be my shortest live, because I usually can run my mouth quite a bit. But leave some comments. Let me know your thoughts. I definitely could go into there because there's definitely some meat still left on the bone, but I'm gonna leave that there for the moment because it's been a busy day and I'm trying to wrap it up. So, but there's always next time. So stay tuned in. Leave a comment, like, follow the page, subscribe if you're on YouTube. I have the links in there in this post and everything. But if you came in late, you can always start over and watch it from the beginning and pick up anything that you've missed. But feel free to go through everything that I've covered over this month because it's all good stuff. All right. Love you guys. Take care of each other, operate in good faith, operate in good love. Don't fetish the innocence too much. And hey, we can work our way out of this if we want to, if we're committed to it, if we want to put in the work. All right. Peace, love, hair grease, let your soul grow. I'm out.